What? I couldn't believe it when I opened my laptop this morning, but it's actually true. Notion just completely reworked their formulas. The good news? No need to panic. Notion automatically converted all your old formulas to the new formula language, so your workspace will keep on working just as it used to yesterday. The bad news? If you want to make any changes going forward, you'll have to learn the new formula language. But don't worry. In this video, I will go over all the changes and tell you exactly what you need to do now to make the most out of this big Notion update. Make sure to watch to the end, because then I'm going to show you a few pretty cool new use cases that are now finally possible with the new formulas. First up, let's quickly talk about a new editor. We finally have multi-line editing, actually helpful error messages, and we have a new way to reference properties. No more prop and then the weird thing in quotation marks. Now you can simply reference the properties that you want to call in your formulas with just their name. But the new formulas aren't just prettier to work with. They're also ridiculously powerful. For the first time ever, we have now access to arrays with formulas. They support rich outputs for pages, blocks, and people. We have variables thanks to the new let function. You can do a nested access to other properties. So you basically now have rollups inside of formulas. And we get access to some workspace level information, for example, the email address of people that we mentioned in the people property. So let's get practical and look at the 3 things that you should do right now to master the new Notion formulas. Level 1, simple formulas. Luckily, the reworked formulas don't mean that you need to throw out everything that you knew about Notion formulas and completely start from scratch. A lot of the approaches and workarounds that you used when you built formulas with the old version will still work with formulas 2.0, just with slight tweaks and a few changes to the syntax. Let me show you one example. A typical use case that we have for Notion formulas is to check whether a task in our system is overdue, right? So we have our tasks, we have a done checkbox, and then we have a due date. Now, if we click on our overdue formula property, the new one, we see our new editor, right? We have multiple lines. If we hold Shift and Enter, we can get multiple lines, which is already amazing. And then on the side, you see, just like before, we have our properties that we can access here. And if we scroll down, we have our operators and our various functions. And just, yeah, as usual, typing something will start filtering it. And on the right, we see the version of how the syntax is supposed to go. So in this case, right, we can either type due date or we can click on due date, and there you see the one big change that you definitely need to consider. Now formulas reference properties just with their name, no longer the prop thing, which in my opinion is much better, makes it much easier to read. So we have due date, and then how do we check whether something is overdue? Well, it means that the due date is bigger than the smaller than the today date, right? So if today is past the due date, that means it's overdue. So we take the the smaller than larger than, can never get them apart, operator, right? And then we type in now. Again, that's something that was like this before, right? Before that we had our now operator get a current timestamp. This works exactly the same way now. And you can see we have here our small preview. Notion no longer gives you the big preview for all properties, but you get a small preview here. And then we just click done. And now you see, okay, our overdue formula works. And if we were to take one of these, right, and move it to the future, we see it's no longer checked. Another super useful expression to know with Notion formulas, both of the old ones and new ones, are if statements. And again, luckily, not much changed here. So if we want to display a message, right, based on whether something is overdue or not, we can click into our next formula property, and then we just type if, and then open brackets. And then we need to have the first condition, right? So let's take overdue. So you see as I type, it filters it down. Overdue. Now, what I could do is I could do 2 equal signs and say true, right? So that means, okay, continue with this if statement if it's true. But actually, we don't need that. We can just like have it like this, and that means it automatically assumes, okay, if this is true, then do the first thing. If not, do the second thing, which just again shortens our formula a bit. So we can say, okay, if this is true, please give me like a red dot, right, as a warning sign. And if it's not true, then please give me a green dot to indicate that everything is going right here. Then we can close it off, we can click on done, and you can see based on whether this is overdue or not, we get our message here. Now, one thing that definitely got improved with the new formulas is that we now have ifs. That's a different operator to if. If is one if statement, and in the past, right, if you had several conditions, what you would need to do is you would need to nest your if statements. We can still do that, right? We can say, okay, if it's overdue, right, give me this, but actually, if it's done right, then I don't want anything. Then we don't need this condition. So we would say, okay, at the very beginning, we do if, and then we do our first statement, and then we say, okay, and if that's not the case, then check whether it's overdue. With ifs, you can simply type them all in a row. So again, we type ifs, and then we have our first condition. We can take done. So if it's done, then please something to celebrate, right? Like it's to yeah, and then if not, if overdue is true, then give us the red dot, and otherwise tell us to be done, right? So now we have 3 different things, and we can just click on done, and based on whether it is open or not, right, we will have our different statements here. So yeah, that's much better than before. Level 2, arrays. The fact that Notion formulas can now work with arrays will unlock a ton of new use cases. And don't worry, even if you have no idea what an array is, it's actually a concept that's fairly quickly to understand. Think of an array as a long row of cups. Every cup has a number. Slightly confusing, the first cup in the row starts at number 0, so the second one is number 1, the third one is number 2, and so on and so on. You also have a bunch of little marbles in different shapes and colors. But every marble can only fit in 1 cup. Now, since all your cups are numbered, you can easily reference the cup in which you put the marble. Want to get the marble from the 3rd cup? Well, just ask your formula or the algorithm to grab the cup with the number 2. Remember, 3rd cup, number 2, because it starts at 0. Now, formulas or algorithms can do a lot more with arrays than just retrieving a specific one in the row. You could also, for example, order it based on the size of the marbles. You could remove certain entries based on whether they're the first entry or the last entry, or all cups that contain a blue marble, right? You could remove them and then create a new array with new items in them. And that allows you to process large amounts of information very quickly and select specific ones that you need for your specific use case. So where do you find arrays in Notion? Well, all properties in Notion in a database that can have more than 1 entry basically are arrays. So that would be the multi-select, the people property, and most importantly, relations. In all these situations, previously with formulas, it was quite hard to work with these multi-entry properties, but now we can do some really cool things with them. Let's take a closer look at these things with a third part. Here, I want to show you 4 super cool new operators and how you can apply them together with your new knowledge about arrays to build some really cool use cases with the new formulas. First up, the dot. Dot? Yes, the dot. The new dot operator allows you to do 2 things. For one, you can use it to call functions on your properties. And the second thing it allows you to do is to access certain system properties. Let me show you what I mean. Now, in the past, right, if you were to write any Notion formula, what you would do, for example, if you want to check whether this is empty, you would type empty, open brackets, and then take your property, right, so sample value, and then close it off. And this approach still works, right? As you can see, it still executes just as before. But as opposed to the old formulas, what you can do as well is you can now type sample value and then type a dot. And the first thing you'll see is it will pull up all the functions that you can call on this specific property that would work with it, right? So it's a great way to explore all the different functions and see, okay, what can I actually do? And now I type empty again, and very important here also close the brackets, even though nothing goes in between, and then click on done. And as you can see, nothing changed. It works just the same way, which might make you wonder, okay, why should I care? Why would I ever use the dot instead of the old method? Well, the cool thing about the dot is that you can very easily chain commands, right? So on the result of my dot command, I can now type another dot and then call the next function. And that will make it much easier to read complex functions. Because with a dot, we can just read a formula from left to right and understand, okay, this is the order in which things execute. Whereas if you've ever tried building a Notion formula with 10 nested bracket statements, you know that it gets complicated very quickly. And once you go back a few weeks later and try to understand in which order do actually your different functions execute, that's super complex to understand. So dots are just a much easier way and shorter way to write your formulas. Let me show you. Let's take our sample number, right? And we can type dot and we can type round. And this will round our sample number. Now, the result of this is another number, so I can just type dot, and now all functions that can be called on a number can be called on this result. So we could say, okay, please give me the square root of this. Tip done, okay? Now we have our square root, and now type in, and we want to round this again, and click on done. And we could just go on and on forever. And of course, in this example, we don't get any result. That means a lot, right? We just go from 2.7 to 2. This is not an operation that we would probably do. But if we go in and need to understand again, okay, how does it work? It's very simple. Take the sample number, round it, take the square root, round it, right? From left to right, much, much easier to understand. Now, the second thing this will allow you to do, the dot, is to access certain system properties. Not a lot for now. Basically, we have in the people property, there's the full name and the email address stored behind this value, right? And we can use the dot to access them, even though we don't really have a property for them. So the way this works is we take our people property, so the assigned to, and this is an array, remember from previously, like people properties in Notion are arrays, even if there's only one value in there. So we now need to tell the system, okay, from this array, which value should you work with? And we type the dot and then first. Now we'll talk about arrays in a bit again, but just like as a first example, this will take the first value, right? So you see, okay, if I do this and we'll just take the first one, but now I can type dot and again, it shows me everything that I can call on this person property. And we have like empty, format, right? All of these are expected, but we also have name and email, even though these properties don't exist. And that's the really cool thing, right? So we can now click on name and then click on done and it will show me the name of that person. And if I switch it to email, right, it will show me the email of the first person in this array. Next, map. Let's put your newfound array knowledge to the test and see all the cool things that we can actually do with them. The most important operator that you want to learn in the new Notion formulas is probably map. And map allows you to work with every single item of an array. Remember in the previous step, I showed you how to get the email of the first person or the name of the first person in the people property. But most of the time, you don't want to do something just with a specific entry of an array, but you want to do something with all the entries, right? For example, you want to get all the emails of the people in that property. Now, the way to do this is map. Map technically takes an array and then your commands, and then it builds you a new array. That sounds complicated, but it's super useful, and I'll show you in a second how it works. Let's say we have our projects and then we have a series of tasks related to that project. What we can do now is we can go in here and then we can type map, open our brackets. The same thing, of course, would work also the other way around, right, with the dot command. So we could also just type tasks and then type map. That would work as well, and then open the brackets, but let's actually do it the old way, right? So we do map and then we take tasks, we take a comma, and then we need to tell it, okay, what should it do with these tasks? Like what should it return? And what I always need to add here now as a second thing is current. And current, what it will do is go over the whole array and apply something to every single step of it, right? So I can click on current and I can just close it off. And what this will do, it will just rebuild the exact same array because I told it to, okay, go into the tasks array and just give me the current value and then do this for every single thing. And then the result is an array of exactly the same things. Now, that's not too useful, but what we can do now is we can go into our formula and we can type the dot command and tell it, okay, access now something inside this individual entry. And that actually works pretty much like a rollup. As you can see, if I type dot, what I get now is access to all the properties from tasks. These are not the properties from projects, these are the properties from tasks. So I could click on due date, and what this means is I click on done, it now builds me an array of all the due dates of the tasks. Or I could go in right and instead of looking for due date, I could, not another dot, I could look for whether something is done or not. As you can see, looks exactly like a rollup, works exactly like a rollup. There are like a few differences like what rollups can do that you can't do with formulas yet, but you can do a lot now, which means for a lot of your complex formula systems, right, where you roll up properties from other databases and then you need helper properties and then you need formulas to like work with them, you can now combine them all into one giant formula, which makes it a lot more powerful. And yeah, just like a lot of cool things that you can build with this. I'm going to show you exactly what with the next operator, which together with map really, really ups your game in Notion. The third cool new operator is filter. Now, sometimes in our whole array, we have some buckets that we actually don't want to see. And this is where filter comes in. Whereas map allows you to rebuild a new array based on different information, filter allows you to remove entries from an array. And that can be super useful. For one, it allows you to build one of Notion's probably most sought after features that I've always heard, like that are currently not possible with the old system, but now are finally possible. And that is to show only specific things in a relation. You know the problem, right? You have your projects and you have your tasks and you have a relation, and in your database you then see, okay, these are all the tasks related to projects, but it will show all relations. There's no way to filter down the relations to only specific entries, let's say to only the open tasks. Well, until now. With Formulas 2.0, you can finally do that. Let me show you how. So we have our projects, and then we can click into here and pull up our formula, and we have our tasks related. And then we can type filter, open the brackets, and filter, if you click on it, you will see we'll take a command, and then inside a thing first. So we first need to give it an array. Let's say the array that we want is tasks. And then the second argument that we need to give it is a false statement. And what it will do, everything for which the result returns true, it will keep in the array, and everything where it's false, it will move out. So again, we need to have current, right, because it goes over every part of the array. And then we need to tell, okay, what part of current should it do something with? So let's say out of current, we want now the done property, right? So I type dot, and then I have access again to the individual properties of my tasks. So let's click on done. And now I want only the ones where done is false, right? So these are the ones that are still open. So again, just to go over it, filter, please take the tasks array, so everything that is related here in the task property, and then take the individual value and check whether the done property is false, and keep only those. And then we can close it off to done, and we see we have now only task A and task B. And if I uncheck task B turns up here as well. So that's super, super cool. We can take it one step further though, and now combine filter with map to only return specific information about specific items. So let's say we don't want to see our task, we want to see the next due date. Now, how would we do that? Well, we can take our filter, and this returns an array again, right? So we can use map on this array and then pull in just specific information. Now there are two ways to do this. We could either use the old method, right, and wrap everything with map. And now you see, now we're back to the situation where we have then a lot of like nested brackets. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to use a new dot command. So we type after everything runs here, dot map, which means, okay, the array that gets returned by this, please now use map on this. And again, we need current. And what do we want to grab? Well, we want to grab the due date. So we type dot due date, close it off, done. And now we see the two due dates for the tasks that are not done, right? So if I change this to August 31st, it changes here as well. Again, so many things that you can build just with filter and map. It's incredibly powerful, and I can't wait to see all the cool workarounds that we can create with that. Number 4, length, which works perfectly together with filter. Length is another super important building block in these new Notion Formulas 2.0 that unlock a lot of possibilities. Most importantly, it will get us even closer to replace rollups. Now, what length does? It will counts the length of whatever you give it. And if you give it a word, it will count the letters in that word, right? So true would be return 4 as the length. But if you give it an array, it will count the number of cups, right? So if your array has 10 entries, it will return 10, no matter how long the individual entries are. Let me show you, right? So if we go in here and we type our length thing and we just give it 1, it will return 3 because 1 has the length of 3. But if we give it the relation, right, and here again we have our projects and there are tasks related to it. So if we give it tasks, what it gives us is the number of tasks related to that project, which is super helpful. Now we can take it one step further and we can combine length with filter. And by first filtering an array and removing the entries that you do not want to count and then counting the remaining ones, you can really get so close to replacing rollups. And again, just making your workspaces more compact and build more complex systems without all the usual overhead of hundreds of rollups. So let's do that. Let's take our tasks array and let's get used to doing the dot command. So we take tasks and then we say dot filter, open it up, and then we need to have the current one, and right, we need to say current, the current value, sorry, the current done, right? So whether the individual entry is done, that should return to false. We only want to count our open tasks. And we can close it, right? And that now returns just the number of the task, but then we can chain on dot length, and now we get the length. And you see again, the dots make it much easier to read because tasks, okay, first filter it and then count the length. And then we click on done, and now we see only 2 of our tasks open. So that's the result that we get here. Oh, and as a bonus, let's have a quick look at style. Style won't unlock super cool complex features, so I'm not counting it as one of the must-know operators, but it will make everything you do much prettier. Style basically allows you to apply rich text formatting to any output in Notion. Now, rich text formatting means that, for example, right, if you have a text property anywhere in your Notion workspace, you can apply bold, italics, background colors, and font colors to it. And now with style, you can also do that to any property through the formula property. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that when you apply style, that means it turns whatever property type you have into a string. In Notion, there are different property types for these sort of things, right? You have numbers, and numbers can have mathematical expressions. You have strings, which are text. You have arrays, which you learned about today, and you have booleans, which is true or false. And the one thing to keep in mind is that the things that you can do with strings is typically very different than what you can do with other property types. So just keep in mind that typically your setup will look something like this, where you have a result helper, right, which has actually the number type. So if I wanted to now do additional calculations, I could do it using this property, and I can hide it in my display. And then I have an actual display property that shows the styled result as a string. Now, how do you apply it? Well, very simple. You click in your property and then you just type style. And the first command, or you use the dot, but the first argument that it takes is the actual property that you want to style, so result helper. And then we type comma, and then we give it the style arguments. Now, one of them would be a small b in the inside our quotation marks because it needs to be string. And then we can close it off and we'll just bold our value. Now, if you want a list of all the possible style parameters, check out the blog post in the description. There I have all of them for you, but just to show you a few other things that you could do, you could also do red, right, to give it a red text color, or you can use background to give it a background. And if you just type background, this will give it a default background, oops, like this, right, the gray one. But you could then say, for example, okay, I want the blue background, and that gives you then the blue background for this Notion property. Again, super, super cool. Won't like unlock crazy complex builds, but just makes everything a little bit prettier. Oh, and of course, you can combine with any other operators, right? So in here where we have something positive, something negative, this doesn't make sense. So what we would want to do is we would use the if statement, right? So let's take all of this out and we say, okay, if, and our result helper, if that is smaller than 0, then please do what I just told you. And if not, do something else. So we just paste it twice, but for the second one, instead of doing it red, we want it here green, then maybe with just the gray background, right? So that they are both visually different. And now we have red number for our negative result and a green number for our positive result. And last but not least, find. Are you ready for the most complicated formula that we will cover in this video? Well, don't worry, if it's a bit too complicated, check out the link in the description with the blog post. There it is in writing, so you can go over everything with a bit more time and yeah, try to identify the individual parts. But I just want to show you what is possible with the new formulas. This certainly doesn't push it to the limits, but it's a significant step up from what we've done so far. And it's for a pretty useful use case. Let's say we have our projects and we have our tasks here. And what I would like to see in my projects is the next open task. Right, so what I would like it to do is only from the open tasks, the ones that are not done, please take the one with the earliest due date and show it to me here. And we can do that with the help of 3 new formulas. Let, find, and join. These are the 3. And we'll take a look at all of them. So first up, let. Let allows you to define a variable. Now, in normal programming languages, what you would expect is you can do let, and then you can do your variable, and then you can say equals something, and then you can just later down in your formula use something. That's not how variables work in Notion. Instead, what you need to do is you need to do let, open the brackets, and then have the name of your variable, the value of your variable, and then the expression or the formula where you want to use it, and then wrap it all with brackets. This is how you use variables in Notion. And the main reason why you use variables is because it allows you to basically put a very big expression or so into value and then use it in several places, right? So it just makes your formulas more compact. One example, just so we understand it, if we have the formula at a variable 1 and we assign it the value 1, and then we use it in our expression, right? So we say 1 plus 2, it results to 3 because 1 has the value of 1. Now, if I give 1 the value of 5, the result is 7, but you get the gist. This is how let works. So let's take let, and we have our result, and that will be next. This is the variable name. And then let's define the actual value of next. Now, let's go down 2 lines because this will be a bit bigger, so we need a bit more space, and it makes it also more readable. What we want to do for next is we need to find the next entry, and we can do so using the find variable. So let's take tasks, because that's the array on which we want to call it, type dot, and then find. Now, find works similar to filter in that we give it as an argument a statement that is either true or false. But whereas filter will return everything for which this is true, find will only return the first result for which something is true. So filter, a lot of things, find only one thing. Now, what do we want to find? Well, we want to find the thing for which our due date is next in line. So let's take, current. And of current, we want to take the due date, because that's what we need to filter for. And then we type 2 equal signs. And then let's go down 2 more lines. So what should the due date be equal to? Well, the earliest in this list. But how do we know what the earliest due date is? Trying to find that in Notion previously would have been super complicated and involved several databases with rollups and conditions to make it somehow work. But now, thanks to map and filter, we can actually do it here. Now, the first thing that we need to do is we need to take our task array. So we need to take tasks, and we need to remove everything that is not done, because we only want to look at the open tasks. And we know already how to do that, right? We take filter, and we say, okay, please filter this for everything where current current and then the done is false. These are the only entries, right, that I want to keep in my array. And let's actually move this down line so we don't get confused. So first thing, take tasks and filter it for everything that is false. Now, then after you have this array of tasks that are not done, take them and using map, build a new array out of all the due dates. So again, we take out of the due dates and then close that off. So now what we do is we take tasks, we filter it for everything that is open, and then this new array, we build an array instead of the tasks of all the due dates. And this array we can then sort, because right, if we have our cups, we can tell the algorithm, please sort them in order. Which means now out of this newly created array of due dates, we have the earliest due date at the very front, which is the next one in line, and then we have all the others behind. And then out of all of this, please give me the first value, right? Because we don't want to compare, what we don't want to find is we don't want to find an array, we want to find an individual date, so the first value. Okay, then we can take this back up because now this whole expression is closed. We tell it, okay, find the task where the due date equals, then all this operation just to find the next due date in line, and that way we have now the full item, and on that we can then grab the individual entries, right? If we only were to do this, what we would get is the next due date, so that would work, but we wouldn't have the task name. And with all these shenanigans here, we can now get also the name. So this is the value of our variable. So let's have a comma and close it off and go down again 2 lines. And in here, we will now have our next expression to calculate the, to actually create our expression, the one that we want to display. And for that, we could, one thing that would work, right? We could just do next, because that's our variable name, and then a dot to access the values of next. And we could then take just the name, right? So this would work. We could close this off, and this just gives us the next task, which is awesome, right? We now know, okay, this is the next task in line. But we want to go one step further, not just see the task, but we also want to see the due date. And in order to do that, we can use join. And join allows us to give it a command, like as you can see, you can give it, Notion calls it a list, it's an array probably, and we can give it this array, and then each of this elements of this array will be displayed together as a result. So we need to use the, not the curly brackets, but the brackets with the corners, because that's how you indicate an array. So we use these around our arguments, and the first thing that we want to see is the name, right? And then we type comma, next again, dot, and this time the due date. And if you wanted to see more values, you could do that as well, but these 2 are enough for us. Comma here, and then what it should be separated by, just like this. And then we can click, oops, one thing that we are missing is another bracket, yes, for join. And then we can click on done. And now we see, okay, project 1, our next task, D, on August 4th, which is amazing. Actually, oops, sorry, I just see like actually we are missing one step, right? It shows task D, but it should actually, oh no, that's right, sorry. Got confused for a second. Task D has August 4th, so that is actually the next task in line. But if I check that off, it switches to task A because then that one is next in line. Or if I have task A and it's earlier, it's 1st of August, it again shows me that one. So bit of a complicated formula, but I hope you see what all is possible thanks to, yeah, this these incredible new operators that we have now for Notion formulas. Now you know how to make the most out of this huge new Notion upgrade and how you can prepare your Notion workspace for the transition. This has to be one of my favorite updates this year, together with the button update. If you're still wondering how to use buttons, then definitely check out this video next, which will walk you through 12 amazing use cases for this other cool feature.